Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. My name is Hello and today I want to talk monsters. I know, weird thing on this channel, right? In my experience, so far as a relatively new Monster Hunter player, there has been only a handful of monsters that have actually really challenged me, that have made me have to accept defeat and form a real plan. What weapon do I need to use? What equipment am I going to need to bring? What items am I going to need, in fact? These fights, those experiences have been some of my favorite in all of gaming, and previously, I'd only ever felt this way about certain boss fights in the Souls series. So when you ask me what were my 5 hardest monster fights, I should say what is hard? What is difficulty? Difficulty is relative. We all have different experiences. Maybe you struggled with a monster that I had no issue with, or vice versa. So while my 5 hardest monsters might not exactly align with yours, I think that's the point. It's interesting to compare and see what was difficult for one another. And what's important to know is this list is about the first experience with that monster. The first time you fought it, the first time you killed it, not the 100th. With all of that said then, let's start with my 5th hardest monster that I had to hunt, which is definitely going to need context because it really is Diablos. This monster is significantly easier than everything else on this list, and it's probably going to confuse people. You see, I began playing Monster Hunter with World about a year after its original release. I started on PC when it had finally come to my platform. I remember the journey through the ancient forest and farming my first awesome looking set, which was Anjanath's Red Knight. I'd swapped weapons like 5 times already at that point and never really settled on anything because there was too much to try and it all looked too cool to not. Eventually though, I made it to Diablos. There's a thing that happens in the Souls series you might recognize. They always put in bosses that suddenly take what was the previous pace and then just turn it up like 10 notches. Say when you first make it to Ornstein and Smo in Dark Souls 1, when you suddenly are fighting 2 fully fledged bosses at once, and it's kind of overwhelming. Or maybe Bloodborne, when you first fight the Blood-Starved Beast as your 3rd boss fight. It's just so much faster than everything else you fought before. Well, I saw Diablos as that wall for new players like me at the time, because while sure it didn't cart me into oblivion, it was my first real challenge in Monster Hunter. I couldn't for the life of me catch the damn thing. I'd be seemingly safe, and then a wide sweeping double head swing or a tail turnaround would catch me. I'd be safe and then I'd get hip checked. It would charge from a mile away, over and over and over, so I ended up permanently just running to catch it, not knowing how do I even attack the thing. A new player experiencing mechanics that are being shown to them for the first time. That was me with Diablos. So yeah, these days I might think Diablos is a pushover, but it was my first time having to struggle to even do damage and not get hit at the same time in Monster Hunter. If you had to ask yourself, what was the first monster that you struggled with? Maybe it was an earlier one like me. Since then, I've played all of World and Iceborne and Rise and around 70 hours of GU, and so now when I see a Diablos, I smile because, hey, that was my first struggle, and I just enjoyed dismantling it, horns, tail and all. Moving on to number 4 then, it's time to get a bit more serious with one that maybe more people will understand. At number 4, it's Crimson Glow Valstrax from Rise. I have fond memories of Valstrax before I even played Rise, thanks to GU, but not GU's full release, no, thanks to GU's demo and that extreme version of Valstrax. In the demos, you're more limited. You're forced to have specific equipments and loadouts, you have less control, and there's often that painful time limit. Imagine being me playing on Joss's Switch, experiencing Monster Hunter for my very first time, facing Valstrax in demo version. It was brutal, but it convinced me to try Monster Hunter finally. And that week, I didn't buy GU, but I bought World. So while I never actually made it to Valstrax in GU during my brief spell playing that game, I had always wanted to fight Valstrax. You know, now I understood the game and had a real chance. So when they announced this new Crimson Glow version of Valstrax for Rise in that 3.0 update, I was thrilled. Here it was, my chance to finally fight Valstrax again, and it was awesome. Rise has a common complaint, right? That it's a bit too easy compared to the other games. Maybe that's because the healing is a bit more forgiving more than ever. The movement is so much better. Wirefall, just as a recovery ability to get up from the ground, is insane. So when they finally added a fight that was somewhat of a challenge with Crimson Glow Valstrax, I think a lot of people were happy about that, myself included. And while I could talk about how it's maybe not enough for the game to have one fight that's a semi-challenging experience, that's not what this video is. Crimson Glow Valstrax was my first time fighting Valstrax since that demo, and seeing that around the world ambush attack was exhilarating. His combos with the 2-hit burst effects were brutal, and visually it is just one of the coolest monsters that has ever been made. And yeah, it made me cart a few times. Nothing else in Rise really did. This Crimson Glow version having a few extra abilities like those beam attacks too, and after I'd beaten it solo a few times, I went to go take this fight to online and play with others, and I had never seen so many carts on anything in Rise multiplayer. So in my current opinion, this is the current hardest thing in Rise. For my number 3 then, this is gonna surprise you. It's MAGNAMALO. Yes, I'm putting MAGNAMALO above Valstrax, even though I just said Valstrax is the hardest thing in current Rise. That is because I'm not really talking about Rise in its full release. When I say MAGNAMALO, I'm actually talking about the demo version specifically. You had 15 minutes to defeat the flagship monster of Rise with a forced loadout, set silk binds, limited items, and equipment that had no skills on it. That was brutal, and it was awesome. Learning how to actually use your silk binds properly for the first time, learning how to wire bug in Rise, getting used to everything that had changed in Rise, while fighting this powerhouse of a monster. Yeah, that was tough. And yeah, harder than the current Valstrax in our nice meta gear with all our healing to rely on. And don't forget, you only had 15 minutes. This meant you had to absolutely maximize your DPS like a speedrunner would. Never miss your damage, control the fight, and you better not get hit. This guy could 1 or 2 shot you easily. So by the end of it, I'd felt like I'd memorized every attack he had, his movement behavior, where and when I'll use my traps, how to squeeze DPS in dangerous windows. It pushed me to be better at this new game and learn Rise. So by the time I fought MAGNAMALO in the full release in low rank, it was a pushover and a weird letdown. So I love that demo for the challenge it provided and for making me view MAGNAMALO as the scary flagship monster that he should be. Alright then, it's now time for number 2 for my hardest monsters list, and I think this is going to be a common answer for a lot of people. Number 2 is ALATREON, the avatar of the Monster Hunter universe. Apparently it's a polarizing monster due to the main gimmick of this fight, the element mechanic. As I'm sure many of you know, to survive this fight, you have to break ALATREON's horns, preventing it from changing element for a period, and also preventing it from killing you with its full power. I love that mechanic. You have a time limit to deal enough damage to a specific boss part, or you're gonna die in a beautiful elemental explosion. It challenged me to deal damage effectively without getting hit, on a time limit, just like the MAGNAMALO demo version. As a monster, it's just so cool the way it controls multiple elements. You're dealing with ice attacks, lightning zaps, explosive fire, alongside the fact that, yeah, it's a big dragon and it's gonna bite and swipe at you. It was a beautiful combination of many fights before it, a sort of culmination of what you learned through your time hunting in World. For me, I came back to World long after Iceborne had released, long after its final update had come out, and I was in a mad rush to solo everything in Iceborne before Rise released. And I had only just made it to ALATREON and was only just able to solo him for the first time before Rise came out. And it felt like an awesome accomplishment. For that fight, I learned dual blades and I ended up falling in love with them. I created multiple gear sets to swap between during the fight, which I'd never done before. I improved my general Monster Hunter movement massively thanks to just this fight. No more lazy healing for me. And I learned to maximize my DPS here, learning that I can't lazily attack any part just to do damage. I need to be attacking the vulnerable parts as much as possible if I'm going to survive. ALATREON made me a better hunter in that way and gave me some of the most fun overcoming a challenging fight in gaming overall. And I'm so glad that I decided to fight it solo for my first kill, because I probably wouldn't appreciate it nearly as much as I do. So while I can understand how the gimmick of the fight and having to comply with that is frustrating, you know, I just think it's worth it. So overall, I love ALATREON as a monster and I love how good of a fight it was. But now we come to number 1, the hardest fight that I've had in Monster Hunter so far. It is Fatalis, the legendary black dragon who destroyed a kingdom in a single night. I know it's an obvious answer, but it is my answer. Fatalis was the final monster I hadn't fought before Rise released, and had been in the back of my mind while I was playing that. So just last week when I finally returned to Iceborne, finish what I started and fight Fatalis solo for my first kill, I got destroyed. I could barely survive for a few minutes in phase 1. I had to step back and completely rework my gear, go get specific decorations, spend some time in the grinding lands. I had to earn the ability to essentially just challenge him, let alone complete the hunt. So when I got my first kill, The relief was just insane. The satisfaction was immense. And as I said, ALATREON was where I learned dual blades. But the reality is, Fatalis is what made me understand dual blades. There's no room for running out of stamina. You will just die. Your movement needs to be precise and deadly. Dashing and leaping and dashing constantly. The movement of dual blades is so free. And with this guy putting fire under you, he's firing out constantly, he's charging and leaping, he's whipping around with his insane range on so many attacks. There isn't much room for error. To actually do DPS, you've got to put yourself right in front of him or right under him, where you're very vulnerable. And as a fight, it's very cinematic. The castle that it's made itself a den of, the 3 phases with the onslaught of fire that burns away the brief cover that you create for yourself, that insane glow of fire on his chest during the final phase. And yeah, the siege weaponry was refined to be a bit less invasive and more fun to use. The roaming ballista was awesome. And compared to the element gimmick of ALATREON, you know, this one has a gimmick too. It's the siege weapons. I hate siege weaponry. I've despised it throughout every fight it's used in Monster Hunter. They're usually so invasive, you basically stop fighting the monster and go play this clunky other minigame. But here I feel like it's done the best it can be done. You start the fight with a quick load of the cannons and fire them off, and then never think about them again. You have 2 ballista to use for binders that you briefly shoot at the monster for free damage and then don't worry about. The roaming ballista is fun to use, obviously, but limited and rarely used too. And I'm not going to complain about the Dragonator, that always feels good. So while this is the gimmick that I didn't like compared to the ALATREON one, I think it's done as well as it can be and it's less invasive. The payoff was worth it because in phase 1, you know, you're dealing with a scary dragon, rushing to do as much damage as you can to his horn to reduce the fire damage as soon as possible. In phase 2, you hopefully break that horn because you're dealing with a more deadly enemy. He is powered up with new attacks. And by phase 3, when you've barely managed to hide behind that wall that's melted away, it's just you and this, well, monster, a real monster. And if you haven't broken the horn by that point, you are screwed. Meanwhile, you're a god if you've broken both, and it is so much easier. At this point, he's got more abilities and he's more visceral. You can easily be one-shot in any part of phase 3, and let me tell you, I was plenty of times. So when I finally killed him, man, my phase 3 was an excruciating like 10+ minutes of struggle, trying to just deal damage while avoiding the car. And it's something I want to work on right now. My phase 3, I want it to be better, even though, yeah, I've actually already farmed the full set. Fatalis and ALATREON too. These are fights that I'm going to come back to years from now just to play again. But there you have it. Those are my 5 hardest monster hunts in my roughly 1,000 hours of playing this whole series. I still feel like a newbie, like I've just got started and I've got so much to learn. And I do really regret not having played all of GU. I'm thinking that maybe I should try it again. It's just so hard to go to that old style, you know, when you started with World and Rise, where you have control over your character. Meanwhile, in GU, it's just so sluggish. You feel like you're fighting yourself more than the monster. If I had played for all of GU when I made this list, I imagine it would be a very different list. Let me know your thoughts anyway. I hope this was interesting. Is your list different to mine? I imagine, yeah, probably. Anyway, until next time though, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.